Good morning, good evening, and maybe even good night. Welcome to this Ask the Expert session called Supercharge Information Protection and Governance across cloud, on-premises, endpoint and remote work environments. My name is Francois van Hemert and I will be your moderator today. Please note that the name of this session has been updated, but we still have the same experts standing by to answer all your questions on information protection and governance. So stick around and let's have a robust compliance conversation. I'd like to ask you to use the chat function in your client to ask the questions. We have a team of moderators standing by that will do their best to answer all of them and bring them to our live panel. However, we also know that the volume of questions might prevent us from answering all of them. At the end of the session, we provide an overview of resources that maybe can help you answer your own questions. If you see questions that you really like, please give them a thumbs up to vote them up and bring them to the attention of our panel. Please be aware that this session will be recorded. If you don't want to be part of the recording, feel free to leave the session right now. To help our moderators, we'd like to ask you to be as efficient as possible. Please do not spam the Q&A channel or do not post any inappropriate messages. Of course, our Microsoft Code of Conduct also applies to this session. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel of experts. Please allow me to introduce themselves, and let's start with Adam. Adam, the floor is yours if you unmute yourself, and we'll go from left to right.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Adam Bell. I'm a Principal Program Manager in the Microsoft Information Protection and Compliance Customer Experience team here at Microsoft. Australian accent, but based here in the UK.
Thank you, Adam. Igor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Igor Beckerman, a program manager within the same team as Adam, Microsoft Information Protection team, based out of Israel.
Andrew.
G'day, everyone. My name's Macca. I do exactly the same thing that Adam and Igor do, but I do it in Australia.
Thank you. Pavan.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Pavan, and I'm the Principal Program Manager for MIP and Compliance Customer Experience team. I'm based out of India, Hyderabad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Bernd.
Yeah, hello, my name is Bernd. I'm based in Munich, Germany, and I'm a technical specialist for Microsoft Risk Management and Compliance Solutions.
Thank you, Bernd. So let's get started on the questions. We've received a lot of questions during the live sessions, and we'll also take the questions from the Q&A panel and bring them to the attention. I'd like to start with Andrew first. Andrew, what advice would you have for customers beginning the MIP journey, the Microsoft Information Protection journey, and how should they tackle their feature implementation?
Yeah, sure. And if you're at a previous Ask the Expert, you may have heard me talk about something a little similar. So essentially, what we think about when deploying MIP is we like to adopt a crawl, walk, run strategy. And indeed, if you're interested in seeing a lot of our discussion points around that, we've actually put out a deployment acceleration guide, which you can find at aka.ms/mipc/dag, which we'll go and post into the Q&A channel fairly soon. But essentially what we do is we consider doing a crawl, walk and run strategy, because fundamentally MIP is a very large set of technologies across a number of different workloads, and trying to just implement everything at once is practically impossible for most customers. So when we think about the crawl phase, generally speaking, we're at the very start of the classification journey. We want to start simple. One of the first things you'll want to do in a crawl phase is to discover the data that's out there. So when we talk about discovering the data that's out there, there's a number of different ways that we can do that. Now, obviously for cloud-based data, we have the data classification portal, which is a part of the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. And that portal is going to discover all of the sensitive information types, all of the retention labels that are being utilized. And at the very beginning, we probably shouldn't be finding any classification labels, but if there are any, it'll find all them as well. And it will tell you where they are, whether they're in SharePoint, whether they're in OneDrive, whether they're in Exchange, and what's inside them. And then for your on-premises environments, for things like your file scanners and things like your on-premises SharePoint farms, we have the Azure Information Protection Scanner. And that scanner is a program that will run on a server, scan all of your on-premises data stores, and tell you what's in there. We run the scanner in discovery mode rather than enforce mode, just to tell us what's there, so we can then get an idea of what types of sensitive data is around. What we then need to be thinking about doing is designing the labels that we're going to utilize moving forward for classification and labeling. So in that crawl phase, you're going to have gone through a fairly a detailed label design process and come up with 4 to 5 top level labels that represent the different types of sensitivity of information in your particular environment. Once you've designed those labels and pushed them out via a policy, we suggest that you start with manual labeling. So users should get used to the concept of labeling through labeling their own data when they're working with it. So when they're inside Office Online or the Fat Office client, or whether they're using iOS or Android or whatever their operating system might be and working with Microsoft Office products, they will either choose the label that they need to show the type of information that they're dealing with, or perhaps you might even have a default label built into your labeling policy. So these are the sorts of things we do in the crawl phase, just to get everybody going and getting them understanding what happens in a classification, labeling, and protection journey. And then as we move into the walk phase, this is where we start adding a few more advanced features, but not absolutely going mad. So in the walk phase, we might introduce encryption into the labeling. So look at your most sensitive label, maybe it's called highly confidential. Think about introducing an encryption template to it, and maybe scope that encryption template to the entirety of your organization, rather than trying to get really smart with individual types of permissions and access rules and getting yourself into a bit of a flap that way. You'll probably expand those encryption settings to other labels as you move into the run phase. You also think about setting up automatic labeling. So when we think about automatic labeling, there's recommended and automatic. Probably configure recommendations on sub-labels. So maybe look in some of your labels for certain types of sensitive data, like credit cards, bank account numbers, whatever that may be. And then when we see those, recommend to the user through a tooltip that they should apply that label. And of course, through a recommendation, the user can either choose to take that or ignore it, or potentially, if it's a false positive, tell you that something's gone wrong, rather than forcing that on top of the user and then potentially interrupting their flow. When it comes to the AIP scanner on premises, during the walk phase, you might think about actually enforcing that. So the scanner finds what's out there and then labels it. And you might also think, as we move out of the walk phase into the run phase, maybe using MCAS to do some of that labeling in cloud locations as well. So from the run phase, that's where we really start pulling out all the stops with automation and encryption. So maybe thinking about automatic labeling via your clients, via your scanner, maybe setting up auto labeling policies in Office 365 to monitor the SharePoint, the OneDrive environments at rest, and also the Exchange environment in transit. And potentially during your run phase, you may even reevaluate the way you're doing your encryption keys. But there's certainly not one thing that you do to get MIP deployed. It's very much a journey and a process, and we really do believe that you should tackle it in small bites and baby steps.
Thank you, Micah. Great answer. We're seeing a question or multiple questions around content marking and customizing. Adam, I'd like to ask you this question. Is there a plan to add font type options for content marking?
That's a really great question, and I guess today we've got, depending where you're starting your journey, if you're starting with the Azure information protection side of things, there's quite a few options in the Azure portal there. The UX, the user interface in the Security and Compliance Center doesn't expose all the options. So I recall, and I'll let one of my colleagues jump in here if I'm mistaken, but I seem to recall that through the PowerShell side of things, we can actually configure a few more options that aren't exposed through the UI, and font size and font color. I recall a part of that. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up from Macca. So we do have some options there. So I mean, if it's something beyond that, I'd be interested to understand what's felt missing. But whereas it might not be in the UI, we do have options beyond what's just presented in the interface to help you configure that.
Thank you, Adam. There's a follow-up question on that one, or a related question. Are we able to add images to content marking?
I don't think we do today. No. So no, not today. I don't know if that's on the roadmap from an Office native side of things. So when we talk about MIP, you know, we kind of have a situation today where we've got 3 clients. We've got the AIP Classic, the AIP Unified Labeling Client, and then we have what we refer to as the kind of built into the Office product, which is the MIP side of things. I mean, and just to frame this for everyone, if they're not aware yet, you know, the AIP Classic client, we're planning to deprecate that at the end of March next year, so calendar year 21. So, you know, if that's a client you're on today, that's, you know, something you should be planning to move away from. The tactical solution would be to adopt the unified labeling client. And of course, the strategic goal is for all our customers to be using MIP built in. So from a content marketing and imaging point of view, it won't be coming to Classic. I don't believe it's planned for the unified labeling client, but it's something that, you know, we may discuss around whether it will come to native. You know, it's a great point.
Thank you, Adam. Next question, Igor. I'll just read it out. We've been trying to quickly classify documents via folders. What is the best way to label and classify a large set of files with a minimal set of rules? Are there any plans to allow label inheritance where you can apply a sensitivity label to content based on where it is?
So that's a great question. Just to answer that, first of all, I'll be glad if someone from my team will be able to jump in if I'm wrong. But technically, you can have the scanner to scan those share files and read or scan the content within those share files and understand the type of the sensitivity within those files. And as an outcome of this, you can also auto-label those files and have that labeling applied on those files. As in for the inheritance, Adam, you want to jump in?
So from a SharePoint perspective, it depends where your files are today. If we're talking about on-premise, you know, we've got the scanner that will deal with your SharePoint on-prem and your file servers, and you know, it will work through all of that content. If we're talking about SharePoint, which is where the common ask around inheritance comes, today we have this concept of container labeling. So we're labeling the container, whether it be an Office 365 group, whether it be a team site, or whether it be a SharePoint site. Now today, that functionality, what it does is it provides us some additional DLP policies associated with that label. So we set you know, we've got a SharePoint site, we set that label as confidential, and we can have some additional settings that determine whether external users are allowed to join. If you're connecting from a non-managed device and an Intune assessment, what's the behavior? Do we allow, you know, you can connect in like a read-only mode, you can't download, you can't synchronize. A common ask, as I suspect this is alluding to, is, well, if I label a SharePoint site as confidential, I want all the files within that site to be confidential as well. And the good news is that, yes, this is coming. It's a feature that's being worked on. I can't share timelines yet, but it is under development. And, you know, that's hopefully something we'll see out there soon.
Thank you.
An additional point here could be, I don't know if the question is meant to automate something based on certain metadata of the files or so. So I can imagine that you could use Flow, for example, to automate the creation of certain labels. So that would be an option to look into from my perspective. If the question is meant on SharePoint or OneDrive, for example, that would be a close option from my perspective.
Thank you, Bernd. Next question, Pavan.
Yep.
Can I create custom sensitive information types based on my organizational needs?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a wonderful question. So you can create your custom info types by logging into compliance.microsoft.com and click on data classification, which is on the left side of the tab, and go to the center of the page where sensitive info type is there. So basically the custom sensitive info types are used to help identify sensitive items so that individuals can prevent them from being inadvertently or inappropriately shared. So you can define a custom sensitive info type based on patterns or keyword evidence such as employee, badge, or any of the organizational needs, or character proximity to evidence in a particular pattern, or based on the confidence levels also. But to do this, you should have a global admin or a compliance admin permissions to create, test, and deploy a custom sensitive info type through the UI. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavan. Let's see, Adam. How do we make sure information protection, and especially the use of encryption and classification, does not impact the ability to collaborate with other organizations?
That's a complex question and answer, actually. So, as Maka talked about in our crawl, walk, run, as you develop some maturity in deploying Microsoft Information Protection, and we're building up on the capabilities that are being used, one of the common questions from customers is, so how do I collaborate securely with external partners? And this is a complex question, but to try and sort of boil it down to some simplicity, we talk about this broadly in three buckets, if you like. We've got internal protection, and then external. We've got two parts to that. We've got, and it's determined by the identity, if you like, or the technical assessment of your partner. So when we talk about B2B, so business to business and business to consumer, we're not necessarily talking about them as a business partnership. And by that I mean, I've had a customer say, well, I've got this law firm I work with, and they're all using Gmail addresses. Now that's a B2B relationship, but when we talk about the technology, it's B2C. And broadly speaking, if we're talking B2B, we're usually talking an Office 365 business tenant to another Office 365 business tenant. And that works quite seamlessly from the perspective of Microsoft owns both sides of the technology in that equation. So you can set permissions against your labels in your tenant, and you can select identities in another tenant. So that can be, another user, it can be a distribution group as long as it's mail enabled, or it could be the whole tenant. And so you can then apply a label in your organization that has encryption settings that are consumable, and I can edit and work with somebody from another organization. So the B2B scenario side of things works quite well. Where some of the challenges come into play is when we start talking about the B2C, so business to consumer. So your Microsoft accounts, your Google, and those kind of identities, or anyone that's just not in the cloud at all. Office message encryption is a really good tool to help with that. Doesn't solve all the problems, but it really does help when you're, collaborating over email and you're sending those documents, because it understands a slightly broader range of identities. So when we talk about AIP and MIP, fundamentally at the permissions level, we're talking about a Microsoft account or an Office 365 identity. But with OME, we have the ability to support this concept of federated identities. And a federated identity is a Gmail account, a Microsoft account, or a Yahoo account. And if it's an email is sent to somebody with one of those identities, they'll get an email in their inbox, depending on what mail application they're using. And if we can, say it's Outlook, for example, and depending on the identity, we'll render that message in line. But more likely or not, they're going to see a HTML wrapper that says, Adam Bell at Microsoft has sent you a secure email. Click this button to go consume this, and we redirect them to a portal in Office 365. That portal allows them to log on with their own credentials, and then from there we'll web render the email, and if there's attachments, and we can, we'll also web render those as well. So that's a really critical part of the sort of external collaboration, and there's some more topics around that, but it will take longer than the 15 minutes we have left. So we do have some content online in our docs that helps with that, and certainly worth having a look at.
Thank you, Adam. Next question, one that I could ask myself. Bernd, let's address it to you. Most of the Microsoft solutions are technology based, but for compliance and information security, the human aspect is just as important. Do you have any pointers on adoption and change as related to compliance, risk management, and information protection?
Yes, absolutely. And if I see the questions here in the chat window, I think it relates to that. Someone is asking that how to manage the zillions of files, each with individual protection. I think you need to start slow, and you should start with some default labels, for example, that are general purpose labels. So you shouldn't have too many at the same time. So Microsoft, for example, has 5 categories of data classifications, from general to highly sensitive or highly confidential, and those need to be easy understood. And then you can roll out these globally to your environment, and then you may have some departments like the financial department or so who have specific labels, or more more granular labels than those general purpose labels. So that's how I would start. Start simple and start with just a handful of different classifications that are easy to understand for all your users, and then roll it out department by department. Microsoft has this concept of data custodians, where someone in each major business unit is responsible for those, for the content markings and for the data classification. Those people should give input about what's relevant in those business units. So I think the IT should not define all the labeling and classification structure by themselves. It really needs to come from the business. And you need someone in each unit, that's our best practice, to discuss what's relevant and what's the most sensitive data for them. And then you can add those more specific labels in those departments that need more specific kind of classification. So that would be my recommendation, how to start with that and then roll out more and more over time.
Thank you. Let's look at the new another question. Pavan,
Yep.
We have a multi-cloud environment using Microsoft 365 as well as Azure and Amazon Web Services. We're in control of unstructured data, but are there any plans to go beyond this?
So right now, we have a public preview program going on for Endpoint DLP, which is by default browser is Edge. And so other things are going to come as we progress, but right now we need to wait for some more days to get that.
Thank you. Let's see. Igor.
Yes, sir.
Privacy is very important to our customers and end users. It would appear that Microsoft tools have very deep insight in the activities and information from our customers. For example, the Microsoft 365 audit log in the Insider Risk Management portal. How does Microsoft guarantee that these aspects do not clash?
So from a privacy standpoint, we have to understand that everything is between a customer and us is something we agree on, and that is documented publicly on what can we do or what can't we do with that data. So that is all under the Trust Center, which you can see, which is publicly available.
I think I want to add for insider risk management. I think this is really, I mean, the question was specific to insider risk management from my perspective. So I think this is really built with privacy in mind. For the first level of investigators, the real username is not disclosed. So it's actually a pseudonym for the user, so that the first level investigator in the insider risk management solution who gets all these signals from the users and what they are doing cannot really see who the real user is. So they just see what's happening. They just see that a lot of files were copied to USB drive, or a lot of sensitive files were printed, etc. So those risks are just neutralized from a friend-foo scheme, if you will. So there's no possibility to see who that real user is. And only when, after you created the case, and then probably legal gets involved, HR gets involved, and in countries like Germany, the Workers' Council also gets involved, then you can define, based on the template, when you want to disclose the real username and who should have access to that data then. So I think this insider risk management solution that Microsoft has now built is really giving a good way for making the balance between privacy on the one hand, and on the other hand, the information risk that the corporation or the company really needs to tackle on, because insiders do harm the companies very much, because they can harm the companies very much because they have access to sensitive data, and they often become risky, or they show risky behaviors when they leave the company and go to the competition, for example. So that is really a case where I see a lot of interest lately, and since we have built this the way it is, I think it is applicable to data privacy standards as well in the EU or in Germany specifically, for example, where this question may come from. So we can discuss more if you like afterwards. Connect me on LinkedIn, for example, and then we can take you to a more detailed discussion there if you want.
Thank you, Bud. I think we're almost at the end of our session. We have time left for one question. I'm addressing Andrew on this one. Can you discuss the approach to adding encryption to sensitivity labels? Is there a risk to admins when users individually encrypt their data?
That's a very good question. I guess it depends on how you have designed that encryption and the way in which that encryption is scoped. So if you've designed it well, then the answer is no. If you've designed it badly, then the answer is all hell will break loose. And what I mean by that is if you've been very clear with your users as to what the encryption does, then a user, when they pick it, will know what it's going to do. For instance, I've got highly confidential all company. If I click that label, that will encrypt so that only people within my tenant can open it, for instance. That's fine, so long as they all know that that's what they've got to do, and as long as they don't apply that encryption or that label to an external recipient. If you've got external recipients, you're obviously going to need to define the encryption template accordingly, whether it be utilizing external domain names, whether it be utilizing the any authenticated users approach, or whether it be utilizing a user-defined permissioning system on the label so that a do not forward or a specific custom permission is chosen. As long as you do that, and as long as your users understand how this should be used and are given appropriate training, you shouldn't have too many problems.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we got room for one last question, and let's see. Adam, what can I do about my non-Microsoft data to govern it?
That's a great question. It sounds quite broad. If we talk about non-Microsoft data, we're still talking about unstructured data sitting on file shares and SharePoint, so things beyond the Office extensions, I'm assuming. And so based on that, it's all about how we look at protection. And in this space, a lot of the time we think about protection, the immediate reaction is to say, well, let's encrypt it. Now, if you're using the AIP client, we have the right-click context, classify and protect in File Explorer, and that will basically encrypt almost anything. But that's very, on a file-by-file position based by the end users, but it's an option. More broadly, what we see customers doing is looking at our data loss prevention technologies, so DLP. And what we're doing there is we're protecting the files, almost regardless of extension, of where they can travel beyond our corporate boundary and protect them in that way. And so, we've got the M365 DLP, which, across SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, we're extending that towards endpoint DLP, as Pavan mentioned before. And also we're starting to integrate in some more of our features to provide a more round solution there. So we have a preview coming shortly around the AIP scanner, helping with endpoint DLP from an on-premise perspective. And also we've got currently a preview in play for integration with the MCAS. So rather, if you're perhaps not an MCAS organization, you can leverage the MCAS DLP side of things directly from the M365 DLP portal. And so we're trying to focus on that unified experience with a single place to configure, but to touch the relevant technologies as best we can to help support you as an admin. And that's not just focus on the Office specific file extensions.
If I may add, Francois, if we still have the time, I get this question often in conjunction with SAP, how to classify SAP data, especially the reports that come out of SAP, or for example, CAD files in the manufacturing industry. So there is the SDK, the MIP SDK, which allows you to also classify data that comes out of these third-party applications. And we do have a very good partner solution there as well, who provides this out-of-the-box integration for SAP reports and also for a lot of these CAD file systems from a company called Secuda. SECUDE. So if you look at their website, they are providing a very good integration to these third-party applications, non-Microsoft file formats that are the most relevant from my perspective, or the most asked about.
Thank you, Bernd. Well, this brings us to the end of this Ask the Expert session. I want to thank all the panel members for sharing their insights and their knowledge. But I also like to thank our attendees for the excellent questions, and I hope the panel was able to provide you with the answers you were looking for. A special thanks goes out to our MVPs, Albert Hoiting, Anders Olsen, Erika Thule, Rafael Kölner, and Sigrid Jago. I hope I pronounced that right. And all the other subject matter experts that have been working hard behind the scenes to answer all your questions. Please refer to the resources on this slide for further questions, and I hope you have a great Ignite. Thank you all. Until the next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.